Vice Chair. We appreciate you being here today. This is our semi-annual opportunity to update the board on the status of our current budget, as well as to provide you with some general information about what we potentially anticipate for the coming year, and get your feedback about some specific things that you would like us to be sure that we're considering or looking at as we move forward. We've heard loud and clear from the board the task of finding dollars so that we could potentially offer our employees an improved compensation package, both salary and benefits, and we've been working hard to kind of uncover some rocks and see what we can find to meet those goals. So I'm going to turn it over now to our Chief Finance Officer and Director of Budget, Sarah Graper, and Jose Gonzalez.
Good afternoon. So as Dr. Pace mentioned, we want to kind of take the opportunity to update you on what's changed since September when we originally did the board approved budget for the current fiscal year, with the changes in the third FEFP calc, and then kind of move into the governor's budget for next year and our plan going forward.
Yeah.
So starting with the general fund, our operating budget, on slide 3, you have our current FTE growth. And the first column is last year, so the 2018 final calc, our total FTE was at just over 66,000. We had projected a 5.13% increase going into this year. So that's what our budget was based on, that 69,394 FTE number. However, after the count in October,
Whitaker just resigned. Sorry.
okay, so after, with our count in October, we know that our growth didn't materialize as we had projected. We actually came in at 67,629 unweighted FTE, which was an increase in 2.45% over the prior year.
So as you can see, board members, we did experience growth from 52,525 students to 52,605, but the majority of that 2.45% growth went into our newest charter schools, and that information is shared with you below. So we have more students, but less than projected, so that's where we are.
Right. So then the less than projected amount, that 1,765, or that we didn't meet projection, if you go to the next slide, that translated into $11.8 million. That our budget will be reduced in the current year. So 2.4% cut from where we had planned our budget for this year. And also just a reminder, we are now, as of the third FEFP calculation, we're back to 66th out of 67 in our ranking for per student funding.
Oh boy.
So slide 5, starting to get at the top, the 11.8 million reduction. There was also a $1.1 million prior year adjustment, which always comes through in the third calc as well. So how are we offsetting that shortfall? First two big ones are the allocation reductions that we did back on day 20. So back in September, when we look at how many students actually do show up in our schools, we're able to go through at that point in time and pull back some of the positions that we don't need due to the projected growth. So we were able to pull back positions totaling $4.5 million.
And we were able to do that at no harm to employees. We were able to absorb vacancies, move some people around so that we were able to save those positions, but at the same time not hurt anybody.
The other $4.3 million that you see there was held back for undistributed FTE, so no instructional positions were ever assigned for those. And then you may remember the hurricane money that we received for last year. The big piece of the impact aid money was $4.9 million. That was included in our budget. We were aware of that at the time, and that was incorporated. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But the federal hurricane restart grant, that had come in since this year's budget. So that's another $1.7 million.
So basically it's paying us back for some of the expenses that we absorbed last year.
We'll use that to reimburse ourselves.
And it's also, we're also still impacted by that.
Correct.
In really our decrease, or our
Absolutely.
lack of increase, whichever way you want to call it.
As you know, RB's been doing some great work with transportation and reducing bus routes. So we have a plan in place moving forward for next year, but currently he's already been able to reduce 15 routes for this year, which saved us about $975,000.
So with the change that we're gonna discuss tonight, would that really be almost $3.5 million in savings?
Correct.
Okay.
3, not 3.5.
Okay, I thought we were 2.5 with the changes.
When we look at it, it's probably closer to 2.
2.
Mhm.
We always hold back some money for any prior year FTE audit adjustments. We had more held back than we actually needed this time, so we were able to recoup that $400,000. The school discretionary adjustment, that is also, we do that every year in January after we receive the third calc numbers, to true that up to the actual student numbers per school. So we adjust their school discretionary budget, so we were able to pull some money back there. As well as the McKay scholarship numbers came in a little bit less than we had originally projected for, so $173,000. And then lastly on this slide, we've been going gangbusters with our P-card rebates, and we had $250,000 budgeted in the general fund for this year, but we actually came in $109 more than that, so that was some good news there. So bottom line, $474,000 to the negative that we still haven't been able to capture.
I will share with you, just to point out, the excess holdback for McKay scholarships. Our McKay scholarships not only were below what we projected they would be, they actually declined this year from 966 last year to 949. So we feel like we're doing a better job of helping our parents and community see that we are providing quality, exceptional student education services in our schools and keeping those kids in place.
So moving on to slide 6, the federal emergency impact aid dollars that we received from the hurricanes. Again, I said this money was included in our budget this year, but we hadn't specifically pinpointed what we were going to spend it on. So $532 comes off the top for the charter schools allocation. And then you may remember we spoke back in December about the need to transfer some more money into the health insurance fund. So we went ahead and moved $3 million into the health fund. So we still have the 1.4 left there, and we'll talk a little bit later again about the need to transfer some more into the health fund between now and the end of June. So that's a little bucket right there we can discuss kind of what we want to do with the operating fund versus the health fund. And the long-range forecast, just as a reminder, our plan for this year was to grow fund balance by $500,000, and this year with $500,000 surplus. So we can still have some further discussions about whether we still want that to kind of be the plan or whether we want to adjust anything, given the information that we just discussed. So at this point, we're planning on absorbing what we have and kind of sticking with the original $500,000 surplus unless we receive any further direction from the board.
I don't want to give up any more than that.
So the key piece to remember is that we still have about $500,000 in our FTE shortfall that we have to make up somewhere. You could either make it up out of the fund balance surplus that's been projected here. You could make it up out of some of the Hurricane Restart Impact Aid dollars that we have left. Again, it's about almost 1.5. And that's direction that we'll need to get from the board as we move through this presentation.
So moving on to slide 8, just some, again, our FTE growth history over the last 10 years. And you can see that for this year, the 2.45% that we grew, and our projection moving into next year is another 2.76% growth.
I think it's interesting to see on this slide just how much this district has grown in just 10 years. Since 2010-11, when we were a little less than 53,000 students, to now projecting in 1920 almost 70,000 students.
32% almost.
Pretty significant growth there.
Slide 9 just shows the breakdown for the last 5 years of how much has gone to charter and McKay. So you can see our charter percentage continues to grow as we grow as a district. And as Dr. Pace mentioned, we are starting to see a little downturn in the McKay numbers. Slide 10 is a breakdown of FTE by program. Last year we saw the increase in ESOL and also in CTE. Our projections moving forward for next year are pretty even across the board, proportionate to our growth in each of the program areas.
I also think it's interesting to note here in particular, that 130 funding to serve our ELL students in 2015 was right at about 6,800 FTE, is now up to over 9,000. But also in the 300 funding to support our CTE programs, the great work that Melanie and her team have been doing, our teachers and our students earning those industry certifications have now gone from just a little over 1,000 students to what we project next year on to be almost 1,700. So you have growth in those two key areas, which do generate additional funds, but also additional services that we're providing to kids and families.
So moving on to the 1920 budget year, the governor has released his budget proposal. So I wanted to talk through a couple of highlights. First is obviously the continued policy of rolling back the required local effort, or the RLE rate. So ours would be going from 4.161 down to 3.918. If we had held the RLE steady, our district would receive 7.4 million more. So that's another 7.4 that we're losing from that rollback policy of the RLE.
And I would just remind the board that the governor's budget is rarely what ends up being the final budget. It still has a lot of legislative work to go through, and we have not yet seen some of the supporting documents come down for review. But it is important to note that that is a priority of the governor. It's been a priority of folks in the House, and we just don't know where the Senate's going to be. But it continues to be problematic. In 3 years, that would be almost $50 million that this district has not been able to generate.
Can we look, I think I've asked before about property value comparisons across the district, the percentage that everybody dropped.
Yeah. Jose was able to pull ours. It will take us a little bit more time to pull all the other districts, but we were able to pull ours.
I think we need to look at that, and I guess where I ultimately want to get to, I'd like to see if this rollback is disproportionately reducing this district's ability to operate as opposed to the whole state. And for example, if you took the required local effort rollback out of everybody's calculations for the last 4 or 5 years, however many years it is, what would that do for our funding? I mean, if the required local effort takes us from 66 out of 67 in the state, it moves us up to number 45. If they're hurting us this much, I think we've got some grounds possibly to stand on being disproportionately impacted by this.
I'm just looking at what our RLE rate was 10 years ago versus what it is today, so we could compare that for other districts as well.
Well, I think what he's talking about, though, is actually the tax rolls to see
Yes.
how far we dropped. So in 9-10, this district lost in terms of taxable value 16%.
Right.
And in 10-11, it was about 16%, 15 as well. And the following year, it was almost
So that's almost a
7.5%.
40% drop. If other districts only all dropped on average of 20%, they're not being as hurt as drastically as we are by the holding the required local effort holdback. And if this is disproportionate, it doesn't make sense to me that we continue to be in the bottom echelon. I get it, it's because of our property values, but are there some things impacting us where we can stand up and say, hey guys, look at this, it's not right?
Well,
And we've got to find a way, if it's right, it's right, but I think we need to look at the data and understand if this is hurting us disproportionately compared to other districts, because my gut tells me it is.
Well, and just so the board is aware, and I'm sure you know of this, it was just this year, 18-19, that we fully recovered.
Right.
In 2008-9, the
But we have
the
not
tax
fully
roll
recovered. We're
was
right back where we were.
27 million or 27 billion, right? And now it's up
Yeah.
to 27 billion again, but it's taken us that entire period just to get back. And Sarah can provide you guys with these supporting documents as well, because I'd had Sarah look at that
I mean, it might
yesterday.
be worth calling either Katrina, probably Katrina, and see within your organization if there's somebody there that can help us pull this. I mean, I don't think we have to do it ourselves. They may have it.
What do you want?
I want to see if we're, based on the big drop we had in our property values, if we are being hurt more than the majority of the other districts in the state because we dropped so far. In other words, we dropped about 40% in values. If somebody dropped 20% in values, if the average in the rest of the state was 20%, we're being disproportionately hurt because our property values are recovered and we can't recover with it. And I'm also curious, I want to take it a step further, we're now 66 out of 67 in per student funding. If the required local effort rollback was not there, would we truly be number 42? I don't know what the answer is. But if it's pushing us from a number like that to 66, we've got a problem. And they need to understand that problem.
Yeah, the answer to your first question is, yeah, we would be disproportionately hard because we went down so far.
Right.
You can cap the recovery at no more than 3% on primary per year, 10% on non-homestead.
They're not even letting us pick up at 3%. Where our values are recovered, but with the rollback, we're not getting our funding for it.
Yeah,
So we're getting our required local effort basically at 60% of what our values are at on the tax roll right now.
that's based on what you were just looking at?
Yeah.
Basically, if
We
the
dropped-
tax roll were allowed to remain the same as opposed to rolling back to last year's rate, it would be another $7 million RLE.
But it's our property values right before the crash were 27 billion. We are now back to 27 billion. We dropped 16% first year, 16 the second year is 32, and another 7. So almost 40% in those 3 years of the decline. So we're sitting here on a taxable value, or that we're collecting money on, of 40% less than our assessed values at the property appraiser's office. That's killing us. And I will almost guarantee you take some of these coastal counties,
that's another-
they did not drop that much.
Another thing to look at.
I don't know, I just
wanna
Tax
know.
roll was the same as it
If
was
they did,
10
they
years
did.
ago, but
Depends
the
on where
RLE is
Miami-Dade was
40%
hit
less.
significantly with the drop and had a condo glut for a long, long, long time. Fort Lauderdale, Broward got hit pretty significantly. The West Coast did, but not as bad. The Tampa, St. Pete area would have.
I just want to see what it is. Let's see.
Yeah, I mean, Duval, a lot of those guys would have. I mean, those were some of the hotter areas leading up to the recession. But they also have higher values anyway to offset some of that,
Yes.
bar none. So I mean,
Yes.
yeah, no, it's a,
Okay?
It may prove nothing. It may say, yep, we're exactly where we should be, or based on relationship-wise. I just want to see if that relationship is
well, it's
distorted.
interesting too, though. It's showing the taxable value being the same as it was pre-recession.
It was 27.2 billion in 2008-9, and now we're back up to 27.4.
See. So I'd have to compare that 27 number from then and what that was really based upon, because we've more than made up the loss. If you would have followed a trend line and say 3 to 6% annual growth from 2011 to 2019, we had 3-4 years of double-digit increases coming out of the recession, 11, 12, actually really 12, 13, 14, but in the real market. And then we started to taper off in the last couple of years into the 6 to 8 to 9% increase. But really, we've eliminated, when you look at the values from a real perspective, we've eliminated the incline and the decline. If you look at it, we've got a real trend line back in place now. So the question is, at the height of whatever that number, that year you use in 07, 06, whatever.
08, 09.
Oh, it was. You had, no, you brought it with you. We have prior
But
to
that would be
too.
accurate too, because they're always going to be a year behind
Yeah.
anyway, so that's probably fine. But
27, yeah, 2008-9 was the high mark on the
yeah,
tax
because that
roll.
would have really been 2007-8 in reality, which is September of 7 is when we would have fallen off. I'd say from the real world, we've more than made up for
No, I know we have.
all the gaps.
The rollback's
And-
not allowing the school district to make up.
And so my question, of course, then the problem on that side would be is that the basis for that taxable value, is it really in line, or is it still, it's always going to be lower than the real market, because it's appraised value, not just value, or not, like real market value, but there should probably be some more value in there.
That's what I think too.
It's probably over 32, if I were to just take a quick guess at it, about like proportionally, when you think about maybe 31.
Slide 11. Slide 11 is where we are. This is not in the slide. This is just some supplemental information that I'd asked Sarah and Jose to put
Yeah, and
together,
we're-
because I
we're
knew
just
you guys
looking-
would want it.
And you guys have seen this before, we're just looking at the slide that's always in our budget presentations.
Let me see that.
History.
I didn't mean to get us that off track, but I
No, you're fine, it's relevant conversation.
think there's something not right here.
Do some more digging into that. Obviously, then in the governor's budget, you've seen the base student allocation is increasing by $50. So we're happy to see that slight increase there. It's important to recognize what that means for our district, because the funding compression that we received last year is also not in the governor's budget. So Osceola was receiving about $72 per student through the funding compression allocation last year. So if we lose that and the BSA doesn't go up by at least that much, we're actually going to see a decline in our unrestricted per student funding. So you have to kind of look at those two pieces together. The next two on here, we also have to kind of look at together, the digital learning and the safe schools. The governor's budget has a flat $50 million moving statewide out of digital learning and into safe schools, so it looks like a wash to the total budget. However, when you really dig into what that means for each district individually, that's about another $700,000 loss to our district.
Once again, why are we getting,
So
that
it
means
has to do with
somebody's
the
making up
formula.
money.
So
The crime index.
it has to do with how each pot of money is allocated out to the districts. So that safe schools, we're actually getting less money because that's based on the crime index.
We don't care about our kids as much, they don't matter.
So the
because they're
high
poor
crime
district.
districts are getting more of that pot of money. And we went ahead and put the dollars on here. so you
Was
can see
Parkland in
it.
a high crime area? I'm just curious what the
Right.
rationale is of that. I
Parkland
don't
is
think it
not,
was.
but-
Was voted one of the safest cities in the country.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but so what's the rationale?
But it would be by county. I have no idea
It
what the
is
crime
county.
rate is in Broward County in general, but the city of Parkland was one of the safest cities in the country.
I say next year, Kevin, we do Blue Eyes. The whole budget's based on how many people with blue eyes live in your county.
That would really hurt us here.
Well, that could be that's kind of my point.
Make it blonde and you'll have a better
You have
chance.
blue eyes, don't you? That's
I'm
why.
the only one in the room.
She may have-
It's a recessive,
I'm just saying,
it's a
we got
recessive
two.
gene. You're not gonna see it
More than you
often.
thought.
Four?
That's right.
Five. We have more blue eyes in here than we knew. I'm counting counts right now. We're at about 35% as I count it.
And the last bullet point on this slide is the best and brightest. So as you've probably heard, the best and brightest is being increased and also being incorporated into the FEFP in the governor's budget.
How do you incorporate that in there when you can't, when they're gonna tell you, I guess we have a lot of categoricals, they tell you exactly.
It just be treated as a categorical. So that will equate to $10 million that we really have no control over. It's just directly passed through to the
I mean, I'm not
employees through
worried
those
about that, I know,
bonuses.
but it's-
But the important thing to take note of.
So now they'll be able to
that-
say, though, we increased our funding by.
Exactly. So that's the
in
important
this
piece to
case,
look at.
90, 100, we increased our funding by $60.
So if you go to the next slide,
Oh, funding that we already had that, but
and if you go to the next slide, that's where we really tried to kind of pull out the best and brightest so we can compare apples to apples with what we're used to seeing in the FEFP. So on a statewide basis, the BSA increase of $50 is 1.19%. total per student funding increase of $224 or 3%, and that's with the Best and Brightest in there. So if you exclude the Best and Brightest allocation, it's actually an increase in per student funding statewide of $75 or 1%. Now, when we look at Osceola specifically, with Best and Brightest, it's an increase of $142 or a flat 2%. But when we take that out, with losing the funding compression and with losing the differential between digital learning and safe schools, it actually drops our district down to a negative $3.94 per student, or a reduction in our per student funding.
And keep in mind, that's all of our operational funds, not just that which we have flexibility over, which is the BSA piece. So some of that is reflected in categoricals as well.
So we were getting, last year with the Best and Brightest program, we got money. It was outside of the FTE calculation. So how much was that last year? Was it roughly the 10 million?
I actually don't know. It would have been less because I think they about doubled the entire Best and Brightest program for next year's budget, right?
I was thinking it was $4.5 million is what we paid out.
Was what we paid out in bonuses.
Does this mean then that are we just going to get money and have it sit here? Or does this mean the formula, the calculation is now going to increase the number of Best and Brightest teachers? You understand my question?
It is not estimated to increase the number of people who qualify. It is estimated or projected, what he wants to do is to give more people who are highly effective a larger Best and Brightest bonus. But it doesn't mean that more people would qualify.
Okay.
The only people who would qualify still are those who are highly effective based on their district evaluation, which does include both the student achievement component and the observational component. And then I believe that this increase, the $9,000, is only for highly effective. I'm thinking that effective would still be kind of what it was. Is that what I heard or not? I can't remember those exact details, but we can double check. But it doesn't mean more teachers get it. And
But the teachers who do will get more.
yes, and one of the challenges, again, with the way currently Best and Brightest is defined, is it's the very narrow definition of a classroom teacher. So that media specialists, guidance counselors, reading coaches, district resource teachers are not eligible for the Best and Brightest. And I just read recently that there is a district who provided Best and Brightest bonuses to their VPK teachers, which fall outside of that strict definition. It's a K-12 classroom teacher piece, and the state is making them pay that money back. So they take a very, that's one of the things that the AG, the Auditor General, now looks at carefully, is to whom have you paid those bonuses? And if for any reason a district has gone beyond the definition that's statutory, then they're on the hook for getting that money back.
Just want to go on the record, the state of Florida gave me a headache today.
Duly noted.
All right, so moving on to slide 13, this is kind of our first high-level stab at putting together next year's operational budget. So based on the governor's proposal, our district would see an increase of $23.2 million. Again, pulling the Best and Brightest right off the top because we wouldn't have any control over that money. So taking that 10.1 away. Based on our charter school FTE projections, the 4 new schools would receive about $3.4 million of that money. We also have our undistributed FTE holdback, 2.6. And then for our new schools and our growth, we're projecting about 2.8 million would be needed for additional instructional staff to ensure that we maintain our class size ratios. And we'll talk further in a minute about where we may be able to pull back on some of those allocations. In addition to the instructional staff, we'll have to add some support staff for the new schools, so that's the $384,000.
Where Celebration Isle comes online next year,
Well, Harmony Middle
this year.
and
but then Celebration Isle the following.
City.
Yeah, New York City.
We do have a projected increase in here for utilities and fuel. While we'll try and find some cost savings measures there, we've gone ahead and included the increase. Some of that is the new schools as well as projected trend. I think we're using about 4% is kind of what we've seen recently.
I'd be interested to see if you guys will make a note to pull this for me. Are increases of utility cost, electric consumption costs with each of our providers that service us over the last like 5, 6, 7 years, something like that? What's the year-over-year increase for KUA, OUC, Duke? I think of the three we have, right?
And are we making, hopefully our total costs are going up less than that percent because we keep spending money on LEDs and all this other stuff. Is it paying off? Or do we say that we're getting these savings by spending all this money and we're really not getting it? New chillers, I mean, every time we get a new chiller, we get all these LED changes, we get this big thing of how much money it's gonna save us in utility bills. Is it saving or is it not? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we could look at that based on the individual school.
Yeah.
And look at the programming for that particular capital improvement program.
Because if we're indeed putting a chiller in that's 20% more efficient, we're cutting all our thermostats from 72 to 68.
And that is one of the things I actually met with some of the team yesterday, and I have a meeting again next week with Mark Cavaney and Randy and the team, our new energy coordinator from our maintenance department, to talk about ideas that he has and where we are with that, and also to follow up on the implementation of School Dude, which was designed to allow us to do a more precise job of tracking those utility bills without that hand entry. It's been a little bit of a challenge in terms of implementing that software, so we're following up next week on what the status of that, and I'll certainly provide an update to the board.
Yeah, so I definitely want to see these numbers, though, on the utility cost increases, basically the rate increases that we're realizing with each of those providers. I think it's one of those bigger conversations we need to continue to have. We've talked to KUA in the past about us being their largest customer and not seeing the benefits of the discounts that we could see with that.
No rebates from KUA.
Yeah, and they tend to be one of the higher utilities as well. So I just want to look at all that, not to pick on them, but I want to understand what our increases really are.
It's a $14.5 million spend
Yeah.
on electricity, so it's a big number.
The FRS rates were released, and so we're expecting to see an increase there that we'd have to fund of just over $500,000. And then discretionary operating again to fund the new schools that'll be opening next year, $193,000. Some additional guidance support for our non-Title I elementary schools. We are funding that additional guidance through Title I where we can. I think this was for one more school to add.
Harmony Community after split the schools.
And then our TSL grant, we do have a match component which increases slightly for each year of that grant, and so we'll have to fund that. It's additional $75,000 for next year's budget.
And speaking about the guidance support, I apologize, I didn't mean to interrupt, but just wanted to clarify for the elementary schools. Remember, that was a priority of the board. We had so we added a guidance counselor for those elementary schools that have 750 or more students. It's been very well received this year, but is that continuing to be a priority of the board or not? That would determine where we go from here. I apologize, Clarence.
No, that's fine. The charter schools, the 3.4, I mean, we're building new schools too. Where is, it's probably here, where is the number that our new student stations are costing us? Or students sitting in those seats? Or are we building seats and not using them?
No, so the 3.4 is the direct, how
I mean, if
much,
this is direct, we have a direct increase.
right,
too.
so,
I guess that's what I'm,
so it is kind of, the answer to your question is kind of buried in here.
It's lumped in, right?
Yeah, the 3.4 is directly for every student that goes to a charter school. That's how much money gets directly passed through to that charter school. For the district schools, it wouldn't necessarily be divided up for who's going to a new school versus just how much total student growth do we have.
But where it's reflected is
What
in
we-
this additional instructional staff and additional support staff for our new schools and our growth. That's where the growth is coming. That's
What we have
that's
to
where that
fund.
goes.
Yeah,
Right.
if you go back-
Discretionary operating as well. That's where those dollars are buried.
reading
Not
my
very,
last
but-
question, back on page 9, I don't think you were here yet. I think you were.
hope I didn't get here till page 11 according to Dr. Pace.
I'm just trying to be helpful, sir.
Some very important data on page 9, if you go back to that.
I'm here, sir.
Basically, since 15, our district's climbed 3,700 students, and charter schools have climbed 6,200. And that's what I was trying to see. That number struck me as interesting.
Yeah. Also, about 1,000 of that is the Florida Cyber Academy. So those aren't necessarily Osceola County
okay.
students either.
Half of this growth. So do you know how many are in this Florida Cyber Academy?
Isn't it just over 1,000?
Okay, well, it still went up.
It's 5,000 still.
Yeah, still.
Yeah, I mean, your point is
Okay.
still very valid.
2,600.
I mean, when you start looking at building new student stations and stuff, just this makes me scratch my head a little bit.
Well, and that is.
If we were
something
indeed competing, it doesn't look that good.
It was better 2 years ago. Last year, we went back, but remember too that we opened 2 new charter schools last year as well.
I mean, do we know why we're seeing this growth? Is it just because there's a chair sitting there? If so, we spent $75 million on a high school. People don't see that as appealing?
Remember that we have very limited charter seats in high
I know,
schools.
yeah,
Right,
that's
so,
not good.
yeah, no,
As I
but
said,
I understand your point, and that is something that we've been aggressive
I mean, we
with
spent a lot
our,
of money on an elementary school rebuild, we're spending money on a Gateway Middle School rebuild, we're spending all new student stations at a Harmony Middle.
You know what I think it is, though? So I was sitting and kind of thinking through before
I don't know,
said
it just
anything.
strikes me as,
With the exception of the new one down on Coa and Poinciana, there's no infill happening there. So that's just grabbing students from Chestnut, from PAFA, from Coa, from Deerwood, I imagine. Probably more so Deerwood, PAFA, and Coa than Chestnut. However, when you look at the other areas that the new charters have opened, they're in areas where there's higher growth in those areas, and we have not been able to build student stations in those areas. So really, I think part of the reason you're seeing that is they're strategically building in the areas where the highest growth is, and they're able to build a lot quicker and a lot less expensive than we are, so they're beating us to the market. I think that's really all it comes down to.
and that may be it, that's what but I just kind of wanted to understand if that's what it is.
yeah.
And is that something we think is,
I think it is, because if you look at the siting, like the geography, it's all those little pockets where there's a high degree of growth, population-wise. And so you look at the new, it's a CSUSA one up on Bygate Creek, right, Renaissance or something, the Narcoossee, all of those are grabbing, it's all, every school I can think of, with the exception of the one in Poinciana, the new one, and the one that was at the airport.
grabbing the growth?
Yeah, I think they're all just grabbing growth, and they're building student stations quicker and saying, here you are, you're coming, come to us.
Matter at St. Cloud is a classic example, right next to that D.R. Horton development, and that's where their primary marketing is happening, as they have partnered with that school, D.R. Horton, to start attracting. It's still going very, very slowly. The Boggy Creek Charter School also started with only 300 kids and is still up to like 450 in terms of FTE. Florida Cyber started, remember, in 2017 with just a little over 100. Last year was at 776 FTE. This year they're at almost 910. And
That's the
only
site,
about
that's the online.
and only about 20% of those kids live in our district.
Is this a trend that you expect to continue,
You remind me, I have a
following
driver's
this
ed question
slope
for
that
you.
we see?
Um,
So if you look at it, let me go ahead and be a little bit more mathematical about it. So here you got from 2015 to 2019, and you have almost like a 90% increase. If you get rid of cyber, you still see close to 75% increase. And if I was paying attention to what Mr. Weissayer was explaining, it looks as though, is this something that we're going to continue seeing in this county? We're going to continue seeing development and those student stations needs being met by charters.
it's hard to project. You know, we're doing our very best to be out there, to be competitive, to make sure that we're communicating the great programs and opportunities that we have for
But
students
if I
in our
understood
schools.
correctly, that doesn't seem to be the factor. The factor is that with these communities, there are charter schools that are being built quicker and faster than we could react, and they're meeting those needs. So is that what we can expect for 2020? Are we going to continue seeing a slope of increase in the charter FTE that we see in 2015 to 2019?
I would say probably so.
It's safe to say so.
In 2019-20, we're
Yeah.
projected to open 4 new charters. But I believe we only received 2 charter applications for the following year, correct? So it is starting to kind of,
What are we
There's the
doing?
other
in-
direction.
Do we have any interest or do we
Yeah, I
have
guess
any
that's kind
plans
of where
in
I'm
order
going.
to?
Do we
Yeah.
care about that? or
Do we care about it, or are we going to go?
Yes, my competitive piece of me wants to know if they're in their marketing, or what are we doing to tell people what great place they could be going to school?
Yeah, that's exactly what we need to be doing. I mean,
That's
that's,
what I don't know if we're
that's
doing that.
been our
I feel like
narrative.
that says we're not.
Well, maybe so, and I
Or do
think,
we not have a seat for them anyway? Or we like, don't say a word because we don't want them to come over here.
I think there's probably truth to that too, though.
in addition to the choice fair that we have been having every fall, that's tripled in size and attendance, from 1,000 to 3,000 students and parents,
5%.
where we aggressively market to kids who are homeschooled, kids who are in charter schools, as well as our own district schools. We're also this year planning to have 2 separate choice fairs this spring, specifically one in that Poinciana area, where you've got Coa, Deerwood, Discovery, Liberty, and Chestnut, all those schools in that one PAFA, in that one particular area, as well as we're looking to do something similar in St. Cloud, because you've got a couple of charter schools opening there, as well as Matter St. Cloud, so that we can make sure that we're getting the word out. And I've been very clear with our principals, your budget is based on your FTE. So you've got to make sure that you're including parents at any events that you have at school, that you're visible in the community, and that you are truly spreading the word about the good news that we had. And that too is a purpose of our State of Education homework assignment
And we have-
that I gave to our folks that are there. Go help us tell our story.
And some of our principals get that. Some of them probably don't get it or don't see that as their role. And maybe we need the principal to know if that is truly not your cup of tea, you might need an AP or somebody whose cup of tea it is to be that face.
Well, it's almost like the business liaisons, right? I mean, wouldn't that be the role?
Dr. Fritz, you wanted to say?
I just wanted to say this, just for Deerwood, to give you an idea of the type of work that's happening. Audie was with us today. He's now at 607 students. Last year, he was below 500. So they're starting to come back, and he's making a conscious effort in that area to win that community. That was kind of seeing how that was working is why we wanted to go with this Poinciana second choice role, because we're seeing the need and they're wanting to come. We're looking at numbers like in Bridge Prep, and they're actually dropping. So the numbers of Bridge Prep are dropping, and the numbers of COA and Deerwood are increasing.
Yeah, that's, just because they go there doesn't mean we go, well, that one's gone.
Absolutely
We need
not.
to make sure it's a good experience for them, and if it is not a good experience, they know they have another option.
So it's a double-edged sword, you know, so what's really interesting is hearing numbers like 500, 600 students at Deerwood is insane, because that school was busting at the seams when it opened, and then when Relief came on with, I think, PAFA next maybe, or Chestnut next, I think PAFA was next, I don't remember. And even when we did COA, I mean, the whole idea was that we needed more relief in that area. Now we know what happened, but I'd be interested to see what the population trend is there. I should know it, but I don't. Is it so much lower now than it was before, and why would our elementaries be down that low in that area? Because you really only have, I mean, I guess they would go maybe up to Matter, Brighton Lakes would be one, certainly Bridge Prep, yeah, but I mean, there's nothing else out there. Yeah.
And the K-8 grade band is appealing to parents. We've said for a long time that some of our middle schools have a bad rap, absolutely undeserved, and I think that's changing. But that is sometimes appealing to parents, that K-8 environment. So it takes away the transition to those scary middle schools that, like I said, totally undeserved. But that's sometimes the feeling that parents have. And also it's a matter of convenience for parents. If I have a first grader and I have a kid going to sixth grade, if I can keep them at the same school, that, you know, makes my life a little bit less complex every morning and every afternoon.
Sure. So let me ask a couple questions. One is, if that is indeed the market, right? Parents are the consumers and they desire multi-level schools. Is there any academic or operational component that you guys would touch on that says if we do a multi-level, it's harder to run, it's more expensive to run, it's less expensive to run, we get greater parent involvement, less, I mean, like, why are we not looking at more multi-levels, I guess, instead of doing traditional K-5, 6, 8s?
Question.
If that's what the market's calling for.
In your traditional middle schools, you have more opportunity for more specialized elective programs because you typically are serving a larger number of students. So you have less capital investment in terms of both the equipment and the space and those types of things, but you also have less operational investment because you've got teachers who are able to serve a larger number of kids. For example, the middle school in the Harmony Community School, in that community, is a very limited population. So you have one English teacher who teaches grades 6, 7, and 8, as opposed to an Arcusi middle that might have 5 or 6 English teachers on the team.
So think about it in a different way. Does a multi-level school have to be a Bella Lago or a West Side, or could it truly be a K-5 and a 6-8 combined together, and instead of having, and don't freak out by this, but instead of having 1,500 students, have 2,300 students, but really be 2 separate campuses operating as one school? So then you do have more students, you do have more opportunity, you do have a greater, you have greater programming, you can do the extracurricular, I mean, all those pieces. Because part of your point, I think, is that the downside is that because you have a smaller middle school population, you have access to less academic and less extracurricular activities just by scale. So is our system wrong then? I mean, like, if we assume that the market's saying we want more K-8s.
Yeah, and to your
It's a
original
conversation,
question.
we just gotta talk it
Yeah,
out.
to your original question about if the market is truly saying they like the K-8s, they are accepting that their 7th grader gets fewer opportunities for, or do they not even realize what it means, and are we not doing a good job of saying, that's all well and good, but if you know, do you want your 7th grader to have these opportunities or these opportunities?
Yeah, I
Maybe
think
they
part of
don't
it
even
may be, though,
understand the
too, is that
difference.
this, maybe the students that are going to, like in this case, Matter Brighton is a K-8 charter, they're going there, maybe those are the students that aren't going to care or participate in the other things. So we're
Right.
picking up the slack, if you will.
Yep.
They don't have to offer everything because those students are attracting a very specific student. We're trying to attract the masses, if you will.
And I
But-
think, Clarence,
but
to your
the
point, there's some of
conversation-
both. There's some of both. Some parents don't recognize yet the level of programming that we are able to offer in our middle school facilities. And there are some parents who very conscientiously make the choice to keep their students in that different environment.
In order to kind of keep today moving, I don't know what y'all think, but this might be a good topic for a conversation at our strategic planning day.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you're right.
What?
I'm just enjoying the conversation.
I do, I like, but,
Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Thacker.
I agree, but before we move on,
Yeah.
I'm getting last word.
okay.
Is Michigan and St. Cloud Middle probably are a really good example in some regard of what I'm describing, right? They really are 2 separate. They're not going to be a K-8, but they're really going to be an education community to where they're not really leaving the greater campus, and there's that whole continuity. I mean, I remember when we were looking at redistricting for Bella Lago and talking with all the parents and going through that whole process. I mean, one of the issues was, you know, Johnny has been a Mariner since kindergarten. Like, I do not want him leaving. I mean, that was the issue. And so I know that Michigan and St. Cloud Middle are not the same, but it really is because you've really got an academic village there that we're building. And
Could you
that,
call it a K?
well, yeah, I mean, exactly. But I mean, so we just may need to think about that. Do we need to, so the last thing I'll say, so you guys can be thinking about it too, is, and I'll use Bella Lago because it's another example. We could use Tapestry and Flora Ridge as well. I really think we need to revisit the conversation on EFBDs, where there's lost opportunity there, where we could start to work more collaboratively with the development community on those. We don't, so you think about my comment earlier is maybe part of this difference in the percentage change, Clarence, over this 5-year period is the fact that they're beating us to the market. Well, part of that is it's expensive for us to build a school, less expensive for them. The other time is the time that we have to put in. So we're building everything to SREF and spending $75 million. Or use a middle school. What's St. Michigan costing us? 32 or something? Mm-hmm. And they're going to build, a charter's going to build a middle, elementary school for 24, you know. So, right? I mean, it's going to be.
Harmony Middle, I think it was 38. 41's the total.
Yeah.
So it's
But either way, we
34, I
know that
think.
it's less expensive, particularly when you strip out those SREF standards. So my point would be, are we so stuck in the mindset of own the building as opposed to use the building, partner with developers, create EFBDs, have the private industry with the P3 partnership build the facilities, we lease it and run it even as a charter or something like that, and then we're quicker to the market, we're less expensive, we have less, I mean, there's a lot of pieces that we could be talking about.
There's, as you will know, there's a perception among some of the higher-end developers that are starting to come to town that they want a charter flag in their community, not a district flag. That should be very scary to us.
It's got to be.
I'm not sure it is, but it should be.
But, Dr. Pace, I would, as we go into that conversation of strategic planning, maybe have some background and some thought and conversation amongst the various team members about that as well. What if we do go down that road? Can we build quicker, less expensive, more efficient, and be more nimble as a result of that? And I know there's money we can bring to the table on that from the private sector.
Okay,
I mean,
got it.
it's a simple real estate equation.
Yeah.
And we're a killer tenant. We don't miss payments, right, Sarah? So,
We do our best.
We do pay our bills on
exactly.
time.
That's my point.
That's right. Yeah, who wouldn't like to rent?
Right?
Yeah, I can think of a handful of people invested under it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so slide 14, actually just go back to slide 13 for a second. So our bottom line right now shows a budget surplus of 1.9 million for next year's budget. Now I know the board has tasked us with trying to find $10 million. So a couple of things we want to talk about on the next slide. Some of our initial budget reduction strategies, and some have been discussed before, some are going to sound new to you. But the transportation savings from the new school start times, we are capturing about 1.6 million.
All right.
As we've talked about before, we hope that will be a little higher.
We started this conversation at 2.4, I think. How did we get to 1.6?
We started at between 2.5, and we settled on 2 to be conservative. And then the current proposal brings it down a few buses to about 1.6. But again, we believe that we're going to be able to recapture that in some other ways.
And I've heard this several times in conversations. There's a big overtime savings in here too, which we're not capturing
Which
yet.
we have not yet captured. Correct. That's where we think we can get to the 2.
More operational savings.
I was going to ask the same question on the 2.5 to the 1.6. One of that is, part of that is that 400,000, I believe, with a couple of route changes that we discussed. Am I correct or am I wrong? Yeah.
The new beginnings piece in particular, putting it on a second tier
Got it.
instead of a third tier.
And then where's the other $500,000? Between the 2 and the 2.5?
When we looked at 30 buses is what we're taking off the road at on the top. That's right at 2 million. And if you add back a few buses for that middle tier, that brings us down to about 1.6. So 2 million is a more conservative number that we know we can stand on. Again, I do believe that there's overtime savings to be had by reducing our routes by 30 routes every day. Currently, our bus drivers, we average between 30 and 40 absent on a regular basis. So that's where you have people having to pick up extra routes, extend their drive times. You have management having to drive buses and then work overtime and that kind of stuff. So that's where we think we can get to that additional amount.
30 to 40 absent on any given day out of
Transportation.
400 drivers? So 10% of our workforce is calling out daily?
How many called out the day after the Super Bowl?
Just me. I didn't drive that day. Wow.
It's a
Wow.
significant number,
Is that
even with our
industry
attendance
norm?
incentives.
Do we know if that's industry normal?
That's 3 times our schools, our teachers, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's significant. Significant.
And I'm sure you guys have strategies in place to
Right.
continue to reduce that and mitigate it.
Yeah. Our attendance incentives, it's in this afternoon's PowerPoint, are continuing to pay out each quarter. Not seeing it move the needle a lot, but we're continuing to work on that.
Is it not enough?
That part, I don't know.
Bigger carrot, bigger stick.
With the bigger carrot on the other side too. 3 times in this period, and I know we don't have them, but if you're not coming in, then you can't count on them.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're also going to look at our school and department discretionary budgets. We believe there's some room to tighten up there. Hoping to achieve around $1 million of savings through making some changes to how much we allocate out in discretionary budgets for the schools and departments. We're still kind of looking at exactly how we would do that, but we'll have some further conversation next week with the leadership team and then in our future budget presentations.
And Sarah and Jose have done a great job of looking at what our schools are currently typically leaving on the table and what their average discretionary spend per student is. So we're not just talking about arbitrary or capricious cuts, but well thought out that I'm going to talk about with my leadership team on Monday before we bring you a final recommendation. But I'm absolutely confident that $1 million is recoverable.
And these are more product cuts than staffing allocation cuts, or am I wrong?
This would not be staffing.
This would not
at
be
all.
staffing.
Right, okay, this is just,
This is the money that we use to buy copy paper
Right.
and spray the ponds and pay for substitute expenses is a huge chunk of where that money goes.
I'm all in on this one.
Line items, we did some significant cuts to line items a couple years ago, but we do believe that there's still a little bit of room to squeeze some more out of there, so hoping to achieve about $500,000. We think we should be able to hit that target as far as budget savings.
And that's line item cuts at our district level budget.
Yes.
Okay.
Say that again. The R or R now?
Our up at the district
The
level.
line item listing that you
Like
guys
it's
go
No, that's
through.
work
I
for-
just wasn't sure which one you'd said.
So I'd take number 2 and increase that to 3 million, and I'd take line number 3 and increase that to 1.5 million. Sharpen the pencil.
Thank you, Mr. Weisshire.
We've
I'm
received
smiling,
we've
but-
received your input.
Well, we're 3.6 short of 10. You just got us,
Well,
you got us a good chunk of the way there.
That's my job.
keep in mind that on the previous page, slide 13, if the governor's budget were approved tomorrow, we've projected about a 1.9. So if you add that to the 6.3, we're getting even closer, sir.
Okay.
Smile, Clarence.
No, the 1. Say that again, because
Yeah, the 1.9.
it's in here. It's in the 6.3.
No, it's not.
No, it's not.
So
How do you get
really,
to 584 without adding that 584 in here?
Oh, wait,
Oh,
it must
wait.
be in there. Oh, I apologize. You must have added it in there.
Gotta go get a card charger.
Oh, wait, is that in there?
Charger.
The math doesn't, the math doesn't work it
You're
without
right,
it in
Clarence,
there.
I
You're right.
apologize, point taken.
I have it.
You're right. Okay, sorry
Okay,
about
so we're
that.
still
This
2.5
was
off.
this was originally
We're
on
getting there.
one slide. Sorry about that. We moved it to the next slide and lost track of it.
I apologize.
I already added them up.
2 bonus points for you, Clarence.
He's the math guru.
You're right. We sat there and
I was an
said
English
morning.
You've got 2 points, you're behind.
I'll be right back, guys. Just continue, please.
Okay, so then the last two are the support staff add-on adjustments. There's some additional allocations that we've granted over the last few years above and beyond our normal models. So we're going to take a closer look at that, potentially discontinue some of those. And we believe there's some savings there. As well as on the instructional staffing, as I mentioned before, we have to add for growth every year to ensure we meet class size, but we do think that we may be able to tweak our ratios slightly. We're still meeting class size without a problem in most cases.
So these 2 areas touch on what I was asking about earlier.
School-based adjustments, yes.
For staffing. And of course, the intent would be not to lay anybody off, but to address it through vacancies and attrition and new growth.
But when you look at our average class size, elementary, middle, and high, with that class size report, we're well below the 18, 22, and 25. And that's where you talk about if you tweak your allocation formula by even a 0.5 unit at a couple of grade levels, you can recover some units without it negatively impacting the schools. And in fact, our schools and the district leadership team have been doing a great job, departments as well, over the last couple of months. Since we came back in December, I have really pushed people on any vacancies. Are they truly necessary? Can we go the next 4 months without them, to give us a little bit more wiggle room in terms of lapse and potentially what we need to do for the health trust fund?
There are 3 or 4 of you here that have come from other districts. Is it possible for you, I don't know, I don't want to have a big work effort, but is it, if we're 66 out of 67 in per student funding, to me, there's got to be things we're not doing, because our teacher salaries are somewhat in line with other districts. Is it possible to pick the 5 things or 4 things or 2 things, I don't know what they are, that other districts, and I'm talking about our neighbor to the north and our neighbor to the east, that they are doing and providing that we are not able to, and quantify any kind of factor to that on these are opportunities our children are not allowed to get in Osceola County because of the way this is working. As we talk to people in Tallahassee about our budget. Do you understand my question?
I do. But I think in some respects, I mean, certainly, you know, there are some things out there. For example, I think of one being choice transportation. Seminole County is able to provide transportation for all of their magnet programs district-wide. Brevard is going back to some hub choice transportation. But as a board, you have, even before I became the superintendent, prioritized what's right for students. And we found ways to do the big things that you directed us to do that you believe are important for our students in our community. For example, being a STEM sturdy district, supporting fine arts programs, having the rich athletic opportunities that we have, elementary, middle, and high for students that this board funds. And so, you know, instead, you're also looking at that 65 out of 67 in admin expense.
That's what came to mind.
As opposed to
Right.
prioritizing what's right for
Extremely
kids.
lean
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's probably part of the answer. And if all we're not getting by being 66 out of 67 are some things that I would consider niceties, I don't like it, but it doesn't bother me as much. It bothers me a great deal more if we're not getting some of the basic bread and butter to where our kids are at a disadvantage. And that's the piece I'm concerned with.
I understand, but we prioritize making sure our kids have what they need.
I mean, I don't have any idea how they spend their money, and others or what they do.
Some of that could go into things like how much we're able to put into the insurance.
Salary pot,
and
insurance,
benefits.
yeah, those types of things.
Okay.
We're on slide 14, Mr. Booth.
Can you go back to,
I thought I got here.
if you'd go back to slide 9, I'd like to point.
Yeah, he's got something on 9, she has something on 11.
So-
I know that Chairman Thackett wanted to make sure we devoted adequate time to the health center and health trust fund
What does it do?
conversation.
What does it do if we hold the capital?
I was just gonna say, and there's really nothing significant in here. The only thing I wanted to make sure that I mentioned to you guys, which you picked on and up on in the last board meeting, the increase in our impact fee revenue forecast. We did talk about that in Business Advisory last month, and we went ahead and made that adjustment to increase our impact fee revenue budget. So that's what slide 16 is all about.
Okay.
And we'll be continuing to look at where we think that forecast is going to go over the next several years. The next few slides after that is nothing new, just our plan to new construction, new schools for the next several years.
No big overages coming?
No big overages and no other changes, no other significant changes so far this year as far as our capital budget goes.
Sarah, so this bullet point down here, 48 million, that's the adjustment with the asterisk for fiscal year 2019?
Yes, so our original projection for this year was the 41,923.
And they're
And then we're
recommending
recommending an
adjustment to
increase to 48. And for the last 3 months, I think it was October, November, December, November, December, January, we were about 9 million higher than typical. So this is still a very conservative increase.
Was there any, did you guys see any drop? I mean, the number of permits pulled in Q3, early Q4 of 18 dropped nationwide. Did we, and I know in our county as well, but I mean, did you see any impact with that, or is that taken into account with where we are and what we're looking at?
I
This
don't
is
know
a,
off the top of my
there's a,
head. We'd have to pull.
I'm sorry?
I don't know off the top of my head, we'd have to pull that. I know
Okay.
one thing that did change for us was, as far as seeing the impact fee collections, is that move from CO to permit.
Mhm.
So we are seeing that shift in timing. So we're expecting about a 6-month period of time where we will see this big increase in the revenue collections, and then we expect that to taper back off.
I'd have Rhonda check what the permit numbers look like coming out of the summer, going into the fall and winter of 18. Because remember, if there was a drop, so if we project this, which I'm fine with, by the way, but if we project this 48 million for 19, everything is going to be 3 to 4 month lag. And so if it was a September, October, November decrease in permits pulled, we're going to feel that in collections come April, May of this year. And so as we make that adjustment up, we want to make sure that we're not over adjusting, not accounting for an anomaly that happened as the market started to shift. And a lot of that was driven as well by market volatility and Federal Reserve policy on increasing the key interest rates around that time. They had 3 increases in 18, they projected 4 increases in 19. Right now they're only looking at 3 again. So the markets responded in October to all of that in the new house starts across the country. So, and we're one of the fastest growing, so if the country saw it, we saw it.
We will continue to watch that.
Yeah, well,
And
you just
do-
got to look back.
right.
Because we'll watch it, yes, but we need to see from the county and the cities, was that drop there? Because we will feel it it's the same in my business.
Right.
If we get slow in production side in October, we feel it in January, February. It's just the way the market works.
Okay. So if you don't have any other questions about capital, we'll look quickly at slide 21, just to give you an update of where we are with our health trust fund before we transition to the health center discussions.
So again, slide 21, just a reminder of our budget for this year that we started with. As of July 1, we had a balance of 10.4 million ending last year. And we expected to spend down that balance by 6.5 million this year, getting us to an ending budgeted balance of 3.9.
Can you please say a projected ending or something other than,
Yes.
because that's not going to be our ending balance.
Budgeted.
Because the 10.4
correct.
is the
10.4 is where
state
we
mandated.
started. Well, no, 10.4 is actually where we started the year.
Okay.
Actuals. That was our balance at June 30th,
Okay.
2018. But our budget for this year was that our expenditures would be 6.5 million more than the revenues we have coming in, based on what we have and what we've allocated right now. Now, obviously, we've had further conversation with the board and direction that we don't want to let it end up there. So our target is the 10 to 12 million, which is that minimum fund balance that's required by the state of
That's what I was
2
getting at.
months worth of
Yeah,
expenditures.
2 months worth of.
2 months worth of expenditures. So we're getting closer and closer up to that 12
So
million
it's not
as we
going to be
continue to
for
grow.
3.9 million.
Correct.
I mean,
That's what
it's
we
going to have to be 10
that's
to
what
12
we had
million.
originally
That's what I hate seeing.
Yeah.
That's not what it's going to be.
So the bottom line, the projected shortfall of $6 to $8 million for this year. We did go ahead and move 3 million, an additional 3 million. We've gone ahead and moved into the fund. So we're expecting another 3 to 5 million of need.
So with that 3 million we moved in, our real projected ending balance would be 6.9.
Correct. We're now up to. And then with every month, we continue to monitor our actual
This
claims.
shows to me a very bad thing.
This was actually our budget for this year, knowing we didn't want to let it happen.
Correct. It's-
And keep in mind, board members, just to go back, because I know a couple of you weren't here, on page 6, this was our federal emergency impact aid that was included in this year's budget as there but not allocated to a specific purpose, okay? Part of that goes to the charter school allocation, Part of that we've already transferred to the health trust fund to bring that projected fund balance to about 6.9, leaving us that roughly 1.5 million that we will anticipate board direction in terms of what we do with that as we move forward.
And I want to be very clear, the reason we can use this money for some other things is we've already paid the expenses that this money funded.
Correct.
So we would have had I just want to make sure everybody's clear that we didn't get this money that we didn't really need, so we can use it. for
Correct.
whatever
And
we need.
these dollars, 1.4, are non-recurring dollars.
Yes.
So I would not recommend to the board that we consider anything that's a recurring expense, okay? Then as you remember, we talked about, going back one more slide to page 5, and I know we want to move on, but I just want to summarize this for a couple. The 11.8 FEFP adjustment for Survey 3, we've been able to whittle down to a balance of about $500,000 that we still need to make up in our budget.
You threw your salary back in. While you were-
And on slide 7 showed our initial projection, which had us putting about $500,000 back into our fund balance. That was our surplus for the year. So there's that $5 million there. There's the $500,000, sorry, 1.4 there. And then you've seen how far we are getting toward proposed cuts, and again, this is still preliminary, toward that 10 million, with the 1.9 projected if the governor's budget were to pass tomorrow. So those are just some key numbers to keep in the back of your mind. We don't have to have decisions today, but as we move forward in our budgeting process, those
So
are
the
things that we need to talk
the
about.
projected $23 less per student. What's that? What was that total? Do we have that total? Is it on here? I'm sure you.
So the $23 less per student is the base student allocation
Yeah,
increase
correct.
of 50 plus
Minus
us
the
losing
compression.
the compression
Mhm.
funding.
I understand.
So you mean in
But
total?
total, what is that? Total dollars, what is that?
If you look, I think the question that you want is on page 13.
Okay.
Okay? If the governor's budget were to be passed tomorrow intact,
Yeah.
with the projected growth that we have and the things that we have to do, the things that we have to take off the top, we would have about 1.9 in additional revenue that would be of a recurring nature for
Okay.
to play with for the upcoming school year. Not play with, but
Okay.
plan with for the upcoming school year, even though the BSA is going down.
But that
That factors in what that
factors
BSA would
in
be.
the time change as well.
Yes.
And when you hear on the news how much they've increased our per student funding, they've moved Best and Brightest now into an FTE funding category,
Yeah.
which is it's the same money, it's just now part of it. So I don't get it.
A couple things. How good is the historical data that we have going back 20-plus years here and aligning what's happened with our budgets aligned to what happens in the macro economy? Do we have good enough data to look at that type of stuff?
Be more specific.
Okay.
About what data we would need.
We will be going into another recession within the next 2 years. We know this, okay? Now, whether it's 2020 or 2021 and how late into 21, we don't know, but we know that it's coming. One of the things that people always fail to do is so like everyone right now is drunk, right? They think the economy is just ripping and roaring and everything's fine and there's plenty of money and go to the movies and do whatever you want to do. What they're not doing is they're not planning for the next cycle that has to come. We have a 10-year business cycle that happens in our country. We're on the longest economic expansion we've seen in history. So that reset has to come. So everybody's personal budget should be taking that into account. All of our business budgets should be taking that account, and every institution should be taking that into account. Part of the reason why we always harp on the idea of having a strong fund balance is that we have to have enough to plan for those times that are coming. We've got one of those times coming. So the recession, with my crystal ball, is not going to be anywhere near what we just went through. We know that. None of the fundamentals say that it lines up to be anything close to what we had in 07, 8, 9, 10. But we'd also be foolish not to plan and prepare, knowing that this board or a future board in the very, very near future is going to have to look at some very significant budget issues aligned with what's happening in the macroeconomy. So my point is, I don't know from a school board perspective, I don't know if we look at the early 2000 recession, what happened to us as alignment to what was going on with the economy, and then how that impacted our budgets. I know we can look at 07, 9, 10. I know we can figure that out. We go back to the 90s recession. Can we look at that? And can we start to find some trends? Because this upcoming recession will probably look more like the 90 and the 2001 recession, more so than anything. Can we glean some information from that of how it's traditionally impacted us and just start to look at it and say, okay, we need a plan that it would be something along these lines? We have to have some, I mean, I don't know what it looks like.
I can go back and pull the numbers, but I wouldn't necessarily know the context behind those numbers.
And I don't disagree with your assessment. I just think you're looking at a whole different set of numbers from 1990.
Yeah,
What we
was the
received, I mean, for what inflation has been, I think that would probably be the most interesting to me, to say this is what we received in 1990 compared to today, and I think that would wow a lot of people.
But if you also watch the trend in what happened from 97, 98, 99, 2000, 2001, if our revenues took a 10% decrease during the downturn, is there a reason to not be prepared to take a 10% decrease again?
Right.
It's,
I wouldn't disagree.
whether we were getting $4,000 a student instead of $7,000,
Correct.
is there a reason the percentages would be way different? And I don't know why they would necessarily.
Well, and part of it too, so first of all, it's good financial management. Number two is, I know that a lot of people don't understand why we make the business decisions we make sometimes, and say we can't run ourselves all the way up to the line and then not anticipate that there's going to be a Charlie, Jean, Francis, Irma, or a Maria event that has an influx of people. We can't not anticipate the fact that healthcare costs skyrocket nationwide in districts like ours. We can't anticipate. I mean, so what will happen is the facts will bear out in the next number of years to where all the things that this board and this team has been talking about, people will finally start to go, oh, we get it. This is why they did those things. And yeah, we were mad at them. We didn't like it before, but at least now we can recognize there was wisdom in the prudent approach that they took to budgeting and managing the finances of the taxpayers. And again, I just want to find where the correlations are, because there's got to be some data points that we can pull that we go, okay, let's start to think in these terms.
Well, and even just moving forward, I think you brought up a great point about, recession's coming, and we don't know exactly when, but it will be in the next few years. And by making sure we maintain that fund balance and do continue to grow it slightly as we grow, it's going to be that much more important to make sure we have that safety net there for when the downturn does hit. And part of what we're going through right now, trying to find savings, trying to get to 10 million, part of that may be that we make sure we don't spend all that on recurring expenses.
Right. Well, and it's even things like, you look at the big recession, the Great Recession, and not having tons of layoffs and all these type of things. I mean, those are all important factors that, it's how we grow and scale our workforce. It's what do we invest our dollars in? Where do we align resources? Where do we find the type of things that you're working on right now? We've got to do it. It's coming. And it's coming sooner than people think.
Noah.
Yes.
Build it hard.
Yeah, build it hard.
If I wasn't depressed before
it's not. Look, there's energy left in the economy. We're good for another year or two, but just don't put your head in the sand. It's coming.
Is that it for this workshop?
It is.
If it is,
Sarah and Jose have provided you with some supporting documents for, your review. As you have time and have questions, please don't hesitate to follow up with us. And again, we'll be back to the table for a discussion and seeking direction on a couple of those decision points that we talked about, and also get you some additional information that you've requested. Thank you, Sarah and
Let's
Jose.
adjourn this and take 5-7 minutes before we start the next workshop. We will reconvene.
Sounds good, Bob.
Frank?
Just got